Thank you, Joe. I don't know how many years ago it was that you and I first met. Many. 15. And I actually didn't remember it, but it was at the International Association of Near-Death Studies, right? So anyway, we reconnected recently. Thank you for coming. And what I'd like to do today is to talk to you about a few main ideas from my new book, which is called Healing the Western Soul. And I'm aware that this is, the first time that I've been here, and I have some people I know that have come, and it's the first time they're here. And there's many of you that I don't know and I haven't met before. So I'm aware that we're in a space that's, we're not all connected yet, right? Because some of you know each other, others don't know each other. I have to be honest and say that what happened in Paris yesterday is still an energy that I'm feeling, and I'm sure many of you feel the same thing. So I'm wondering, I've been thinking, what can we do to start this discussion on what it means to heal the Western soul, given that there's so many different energies and feelings that we've all come in with. Okay, what I'd like to try to do now is just to take a few minutes and see if we can all come together, maybe in a more connected space, if that's okay with you. So I would like to suggest that we do a meditation of sorts. Not a whole long one, but the meditation that I want to do is has a lot of relevance to what I'd like to share with you from my book. And it's a way that we can try to come together. So I know you're in hardback chairs and all, but I'd like to ask you if you would try to get as comfortable as you can in your seat. Maybe you want to shake part of your body if you're feeling a little tension or wiggliness or something like that. When you're settled in, would you close your eyes, please? And I'd like you to become aware of your breath. I'd like you to breathe a little more deeply than normal. I'd like you to inhale and exhale. Become aware of your breath. Now I'd like to ask you to consider the term God. Maybe you might think of God as an omnipotent, huge, sacred force. A force that exists now, has always existed, and will always be. Please breathe deeply into this concept. Maybe you can also think of God as beyond time and space. Breathe deeply. Let yourself also consider this concept. Now ask yourself the question, how can I fully experience God for myself? Breathe into this question. Feel the strong energy that holds this question. Feel the stillness and silence that holds this question. Maybe you can consider that one way to experience God is within the God self, the I am. It is how we as humans can experience the God force within ourselves. It lives in the soul, the deepest and most authentic part of who we are, the divine spark within. Let yourself feel this. Maybe you can also experience God as the other, beyond life and death. The great transcendent thou, outside of and beyond you. It is the sacred other that the seeker must fully surrender to, pray to, and realize that it is this other who opens the possibility for the life we live. Again, let yourself feel this in the stillness of your being. Maybe you can also experience God through the all, feeling connected and merged with everything. No inner, no outer. The great web of life, the perfection of what's called oneness. It is the sacred energy that comes through all living things and binds us together. This deep sense of connection and oneness can be felt through the sparkle that we can see in someone else's eyes, the unconditional love we experience from our pets, the awe we can feel in nature, in a cathedral, through music and art. Experiencing God as the all is the connection that we have to ourselves, each other, and God itself. Let yourself now feel God fully in all these ways together. First, within yourself, the I am. Second, the God outside and beyond yourself, through faith and trust. You are never alone. Third, the sacred energy that flows throughout us all. Now be in these feelings, in these experiences. Breathe into them. Feel the silence. This is oneness, no separation. Feeling the God force flow through you. Feeling the God force beyond you. Feeling the God force all around you. Reality is all one. You are part of this one. This oneness is you. You know, we talk about spiritual maturity or spiritual development. I believe that experiencing the sacred within, outside of ourselves, and through each other is what it's all about. And in the East, they call that enlightenment. The person that is able to feel and be part of the sacred and realize that is the reality that is. In the West, we call that union. That's the oneness and the connection of it all. And, you know, almost all spiritual traditions say the same thing. For example, in Christian mysticism, Jesus said to his disciples, when you make the two one, and when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make the male and female into a single one, then you shall enter the kingdom. In Jewish mysticism, union with God is the essence of the spiritual journey. And it's actually, the Hebrew term is Ein Sof, which is written in the Kabbalah, which is the writings of Jewish mysticism. And then in Tibetan Buddhism, oneness is considered exalted and reflective of enlightenment. Initiates term it luminosity emptiness, the experience of which they say simply surpasses any attempts at description. And then in the Hindu Upanishads, they write, above time all is Brahman, one and infinite. He is beyond north and south, east and west, above and below. To the unity of that one goes he who knows this. And then in Islam, the Quran states, the entire universe, in the way it is created, in the way it is controlled, bears witness to the oneness of Allah. And behind the forms is this one who gives them shape. Now, most of you know this is a church, and this is something that is felt to be sacred. You know, spirituality has become a hot new topic in our culture. You don't have to go to church to talk about spirituality. It's in the media, there are books, it's now even in academia. And the reason I wrote the book, Healing the Western Soul, is because in spite of all this emphasis on spirituality, I think in the West we are really missing a great deal. I mean, you know, Joe said I teach at Columbia, and I'm in the Human Development Department, and I teach courses such as personality development and child development and adult development. And early on, I tried to get a course in called spiritual development across the lifespan. So it took me 5 years, but because I got good evaluations, they thought, oh, well, how bad can it be? So I have now been teaching spiritual development across the lifespan. So people, students, and this is in the graduate school, you know, they check me out. And increasingly, you know, many students come to me and said, I wanted to meet you and to tell you I'm really into spirituality. And so I'll say, oh, good. So what is that for you? Oh, well, I'm a really spiritual person. Oh, good. Well, could you tell me what that's about for you? Well, I care about people. You know, I go into nature and my heart opens wide. And it's all about loving everybody and each other. And so then I'll say, oh, is there the sacred in it for you? What do you mean? So, you know, I don't jump to the term God person. So I said, well, you know, is there anything holy in it? Or is there, I don't know, do you call it the higher power? Oh, sure, that's in it. Well, what is your relationship with this higher power? So, truly, I think there's a major crisis going on in the West, healing the Western soul. My belief is that many people are using the term spirituality, but it's very, very superficial. And, you know, those of you who are here obviously take this whole topic seriously. And my guess is that many of you have probably been on your own spiritual journey for a long time. And if you're in your own spiritual journey, that means that you really do need to focus on your own inner self. That means the psychological, emotional issues. That means the shadow. That means the darkness within, as well as your connection to the light. So, you know, Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, you know, you're familiar with the idea of the hero's journey. Well, the hero's journey is, you know, he garnered from all cultures and all history what makes a hero, you know, and it was cross-cultural. And he looked at the mythologies, you know, what came out of these places. And what is the hero's journey? Well, he said the hero's journey is the journey to God. And as popular as the hero's journey was, I don't think there's too many people that looked at it that way. The journey to God means, you know, the mystics used the term purification. They knew that the path to God was about their own purification, their own focus on their inner darkness, their shadow, their challenges, their light. One cannot be spiritually developed or mature or even on such a path unless one is willing to really face one's inner demons, as well as the spark of the divine within themselves. So, I'm going to read a few excerpts from the book that I think are pertinent to this. Okay, so since I've been teaching at Columbia and, you know, I think psychology without spirituality and spirituality with psychology, they just don't work, either one of them. So I've gotten a lot of papers and comments from students and even clients over the year that express what's going on with them. I'd like to read you a few excerpts of evidence, again, why I think we need to heal the Western soul. So we'll start with students. Marcia wrote, up until the age of 9, I would experience regular dream visitations from my grandmother, who had died when I was 6. I loved her and missed her desperately, but was forbidden to talk about her and my visions. Instead, I was put on antidepressants. Then there was Evan. How can I believe in a God after the Holocaust? I have no faith in anything. I often feel scared about death and the future. Life seems to be just a matter of luck, and that is really unfair. And then there was Clarissa. I am not an atheist. I don't know what I am. My parents were Protestant, but did not have me baptized because they wanted to give me the freedom to come to my own decisions about religion. But I'm still searching for a sign that will show me where to begin. I have overwhelming fears about the idea that there is nothing at all after death. Although I try to convince myself that I may be reincarnated into another being, this belief does not give me any security. I am consumed by the fear that life is all there is, and after that there is nothing. A few comments from some clients that I had. There was Jack. He said, even though I was abused by a priest when I was an altar boy, I remained in the church and still believe in God. The influences from childhood are so deep that I am afraid to go it alone. All the same, I don't say anything about beliefs to my children. My wife is an atheist, which divides our family so that we never talk about anything meaningful. When my 6-year-old asked me about death, I just avoided the subject. Then there was Suzanne. We went to church infrequently, yet my parents encouraged us to think about God and to regularly pray. After going through the women's movement, I didn't want to have anything to do with the patriarchy in Christianity. So now I just meet every now and then with friends and we debate issues like whether there is a God. I always leave feeling that we never get close to any answers. Jackie. I have been active in a variety of spiritual groups and communities. During one group, I participated in a trance dance where we would contact a higher power. During this dance, I once became sort of manic and had to be hospitalized. Now I'm afraid to believe anything and can't function without lithium. I struggle all the time with depression. These are not unusual kinds of feelings and experiences and what people say. What does it mean to be spiritual today in the West? I think, the world's in really a bad place now, and we know that. And the amount of people on psychotropic medication, between anxiety and depression, I think the latest statistics were 1 out of every 5 child is on something. They call it a learning disability or hyperactivity or whatever. So, people are really good, basically, and we have support systems in place in the West that really are trying to help people, not only emotionally and psychologically and existentially, but spiritually as well. And I think the 3 main support systems that I would say really try to help us all, I would say religion is one. I would say psychology is another. And I'll call the third one the New Age movement, or, we can say it New Spirituality or whatever. And no question, there's really committed, caring people, in each of these support groups. But they haven't quite done it right. Now, we'll start with religion. Many of the younger people and even the older people that I meet report being really disappointed with their childhood birth religion. They report that they had yearnings, they had feelings, but there didn't seem to be a space for them to be able to express it and get support. One of the places where I've done work, and I know Joe went there, is Union Theological Seminary in New York. It's part of Columbia. So, I've been so bummed out about psychology. I had this fantasy, boy, to be able to be in a seminary, that's a cool place. And, I would not have gray hairs if I was in a seminary because there would be all kinds of support there. So I've had the opportunity to actually do some work at Union Seminary, and these were with young people who, heard a calling from God. They were wanting to devote their lives to this. And as I met these people, there's no question their souls were so on fire for trying to work this out. And shock of all shocks, I found out that there's nothing there to help support them with their processes. It's like I started to do some experiential work with them and talk about their feelings. And the message I got, this was the first time that anybody did that. And, I'm not a seminarian, I'm Jewish, which I'll tell you about. So what an odd thing. And why was that? Well, it was academia and learning all these things. So there's that aspect of religion that I think have let a lot of people down. Then, people it's very easy for people to say, do you realize all the violence and horror in the name of religion throughout time? And of course we know that. Of course we know that. So they talk about that. They talk about the patriarchy. We hear all these very contemporary reasons why religion has let them down. Let me just give you another little example I wrote about in my book that shows this, I think. I once had a student named Rebecca. She was actually a middle-aged woman that had been the principal. Bye, Joe.
Take care.
Joe came because to be nice, and he just broke his leg and has to get an MRI. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Joe. So anyway, so Rebecca had been a principal in a Jewish school for many years. And she was getting her PhD in Jewish studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So clearly, religion was something very, very strong for her. She came to see me because despite all of her years of study and commitment, she said she felt as if something was missing from her spiritual life. As we talked, she broke down and began to sob. She finally confessed that she was afraid to pray because 10 years earlier she had a spiritual experience of such intense love, which she said she knew was God, that she became overwhelmed. She feared she would be shattered by the power of this love and immediately distanced herself from prayer. Through our discussions, she came to realize that her fear and also her ego were keeping her from her greatest spiritual yearning, to feel at one with God. Again, it is important for Western seekers to remember the ego can survive intact with God as I am and the God as all. But in relation with the God as other, there is no option but to surrender and give up control to this immensity, which is so much more powerful than our separate individual selves. And that goes so against the main belief that we have about what makes us highly functional people in the West, to be in control, to make choices, to be in charge. And as all the spiritual traditions say, to get to that place of oneness, it's ultimately about total surrender. And that is very, very hard for many people to do. So, okay, that's the first support system. The second support system that I believe has led us down is my field of psychology. And I guess I should tell you how I got into this whole area. I was a young woman married with 2 children, and I decided to go back and get my PhD in psychology. And so life was pretty full. And I have to say I was doing okay. I was keeping everything in balance. Marty, my husband, is sitting over there. He'll agree or not agree. But, and at the same time, while I was doing all that, I was working with a psychiatric population, schizophrenics, people with psychoses, and I was doing pretty good. And then something happened. I should tell you, I guess, that growing up, I came from a secular Jewish family. There wasn't really much religion involved. My parents belonged to a temple. We went a few times a year on the high holy days, but it was never an issue, really. And what seemed to be the politically correct term at that time was an agnostic. An agnostic, well, you just didn't know, and that was cool with me. So at this period of my life when I was very involved and very busy and things were going well, I suddenly started to have these spontaneous spiritual, mystical experiences. They would happen as I was getting ready for sleep. They would come through my consciousness. I would have images. I would see lights. I would get messages. Sometimes I'd be brushing my teeth and they would be happening. Well, this was in the 80s. This was before you could go to Barnes & Noble and read New Age books or turn on the internet. So what in the world was happening to me? And then, of course, what made it really unsettling is that I became aware that my experiences and what I was feeling and seeing was very similar to my schizophrenic clients, my psychotic clients. The ones that they would write next to their diagnosis, religious ideation, grandiosity, conflicts between dark and light and good and evil. So here I was. I couldn't really go to my supervisors, and I couldn't go to my psychology colleagues because they really would have put me on medication and who knows, pushed me out of the department. But, I knew that I wasn't mentally ill. And I knew that because I was holding it all together, right? And so I had to figure out what was going on. And I began to find books. And I have to tell you, I think that in many ways there was spiritual guidance in this, because I might have a mystical experience that was a little overwhelming, and then suddenly a resource or a book would somehow come to me. And it was almost like I was having these experiences, and then somehow I would gain information that would describe what these were. And what it was describing, well, these were really mystical experiences. And there's a whole literature of this. And this has been going on from time itself. Well, so I was reading, I was doing my work, I was trying to raise my kids, and then I found out that there was a group called International Association of Near-Death Studies, where I saw Joe. And as I became involved in that as an objective psychologist, because I was really, very unsettled at this time, I could interview near-death experiencers and find out that when they were dead, they had the same kinds of experiences that I was having as alive, that my schizophrenic clients were having in their, what were called hallucinations and delusions. So I realized that there is something here. There's a reality. There's a consciousness that we can all tap into, and many are tapping into. And it has been going on throughout time, but depending on who you speak to, and depending on who gets to make a determination, you can be labeled crazy or, whatever else. And so this is how my life's path has begun. And in fact, I've been working over the years and trying to bring this awareness into the mainstream. I know many people in this field, they go away from the mainstream because they think it's impossible, But I found myself in academia. I've been dealing with all the challenges there. For many years, I really tried to work within the psychiatric system itself, into the community mental health. And that was a real difficult thing. And I'm sorry to say I don't think I made any kind of headway in that. And at one point, I finally had to have an ego death and say, okay, I've got to put my energy elsewhere. By teaching, I'm hoping that future therapists will hear these things and maybe take it to the next level. Because this generation of psychiatrists, for them to acknowledge that their psychotic client is tapping into a level of consciousness that they don't know anything about, it would be impossible. It would be impossible. So the field of psychology, and increasingly in psychology, as we see that spirituality is now moving into it. There are many people that are saying, I'm a spiritual psychologist, or I do. My experience with it is very disappointing, because what I find is that it's easy to talk about lightness and, love and fun, but when it comes to really working with the inner demons and all the challenges and letting go of control and getting the ego out of it, it doesn't seem that there's too many that are interested in doing that. So let me read you another example of psychology in this situation. Well, there was Paul, and he was a commercial artist. His wife, Jane, was an elementary school teacher. Both were agnostic. They came to me to discuss an overwhelming experience that Paul had had a few nights earlier. He was sitting and relaxing in the tub at home when suddenly, in an inexplicable instant, his sense of boundaries disappeared and he was enveloped in a powerful, brilliant light. He felt the presence of God and heard what seemed like God's voice, revealing profound wisdom about human nature, life, and death. Time stood still. Several hours seemed to go by in a second. In a heightened state of consciousness, Paul became aware of an infinite, all-seeing, all-knowing presence, a divine force immeasurably greater than himself. He felt that his identity had been annihilated. After the experience eventually faded, he was deeply shaken, wondering whether he was going crazy. And his loving wife did everything that she could, which was to take him to the emergency ward. And then you know what happened after that. He was put on meds. They're not keeping people very long now because of insurance. He was there for about a week and, came out zonked. And fortunately had the resourcefulness to be able to seek me out. And then we started working on his experience. Lastly, the last support system I'm going to talk about, and I guess this is what irritates me even the most, is the New Age movement. And, if you go on any dating site, you'll see, I am an SBNR, looking for another SBNR, spiritual but not religious. And, that has become the deal now. And most people that I know that talk about spirituality, there's workshops, there's groups, there's, an academia. This is considered the politically correct. And if you say something like, you don't even have to say God, you can say a higher power or anything like good or evil or dark or light, that is persona non grata. And they talk about being spiritual, but because of postmodernism and relativism and, the idea of any kind of absolute is considered not okay. And so, that meditation that we did in the beginning, for me, if we talk about God, we talk about a reality. We talk about what is. We talk about having access within, beyond, through. That's an absolute. That is what is. If we can't accept that, then how can we even talk about spirituality at all? So there's a few others, not many. Some of you may be familiar with Thomas More. He wrote a lot about the soul in the 90s. He said, many of us spend time trying to be something we're not. The Dalai Lama said, study your own tradition, much better, much safer. And then I have a favorite. This is an 18th century Hasidic rabbi, and his name was Rabbi Zasya. And Zasya said, when I get to heaven, they will not ask me, why were you not Moses? Instead, they will ask, why were you not Zasya? So I think what these teachings tell us is that we really have one big job in life, which is to become fully and totally ourselves. And our spiritual identity is a big part of what that is. There's actually been research that has been done on individuals and on actual civilizations and large societies. And this research shows that an individual will have a much weaker, more fragile sense of self if he or she doesn't have a strong spiritual identity. And then in terms of civilizations, over time and over history, it has been shown that civilizations and cultures with a weak spiritual identity will ultimately falter and fall. So, I'm going to be finishing up in a few minutes. Just to tell you a little bit about my work over the years. I do something that is called breath work. It's not a magical method, but it's an opportunity where people can make a direct connection with spiritual consciousness. They can open up their consciousness and have a personal experience. And so what this breath work is, and there's some people here that have been doing that with me, like in a group like this, for example, you would come in, we would put mattresses down on the floor, you would be lying with a pillow and a blanket and maybe a teddy bear. Maybe you'd close your eyes. We dim the light, and for several hours there would be a very strong, powerful music playing. What this is an opportunity for people to have a very powerful meditation, because the music is developed for that point. A very strong, powerful meditation that opens the possibility for people to go down into their soul and expanding their consciousness and seeing whatever inner experience comes up for several hours at a time. It can be a full-blown mystical experience. You can have images from the collective unconscious that Jung talked about that can tap into different religious cultures and groups. You can become a 4-year-old and start crying because of a toilet training problem you had. You can go into your deep unconscious, and whatever unresolved issues are there will come up to show you what you need to look at. Some people even actually go through their own birth process. And so I've been doing this now for 20 years. And so I guess it's like thousands of people at this point. And I have to tell you that there has never been a situation where a person did not have an experience or the person tapped into something that they couldn't handle. Because when I do it, when I introduce it to people, very often we hear, oh, suppose I find out I'm a murderer inside, or a homicidal maniac, or suppose nothing happens to me. I mean, these are typically what people are concerned about. What I have come to believe is that we really are programmed to heal. And there is a goodness that is active in our core self that tries to guide and to push. And what is that healing? It's to open up to whatever the shadow is within us. It's to open up to whatever the light is. It's to make us aware. And it's so people can start to trust that there is light that they can access to help them resolve whatever those difficult problems are. And so I see spiritual development as a long-term psycho-spiritual process, as the mystics say, of purification. And so in addition to creating these spaces where people can have that experience, then what's really important with that is to help them understand what this means. The mystics say spiritual evolution comes from the direct experience and also understanding. Just having an epiphany experience is not enough if you're not supported and seeing what it means in terms of your own development, your personality, your life. And so this is the work that I've been doing. And I guess the last thing that I'll say just about the book, that the first section of the book says the Western spiritual angst. The second section is our Western spiritual roots. And the third section is our Western spiritual path. One of the examples of, I believe, the spiritual guidance that came to me is as I was going through my own process, trying to find books, and as I was working with my clients now in the breath work, and they were opening up and having experiences, I was wanting to know, what is this? You know, my experiences were similar to their experiences. I was looking for a map. I was looking for something. I couldn't really find it. And then one day, I was in the library in a moment of despair, and a book fell practically on my head. Maybe some of you are familiar with Evelyn Underhill. Evelyn Underhill in 1911 wrote the classic work on Western mysticism. That book came down on my head virtually. I opened it up, and it was many years ago, but it was like a whole new lease on life. She identified stages on the Western mystical path that people go through. Well, she was talking about mystics and saints. To make the long story short, what she wrote about was exactly what I was going through, what my clients were going through. We were everyday, ordinary people. In 1911, she wrote about only saints and mystics. And what I learned is this is the potential for everybody. People are opening up more and more. I modified Underhill's model to 3 stages on the Western spiritual path, which I called awakening, illumination, and union. And awakening, can be a period of time where somebody's living happily in postmodern 2015, and suddenly something happens. A glimpse of the transcendent. Whether it's a big dream, whether it's a synchronicity, whether it's a vision, something happens that beyond the 5 senses, a precognitive experience. So everything shifts. A glimpse of the transcendent. Or awakening can happen when people start asking themselves big questions. Everything's going fine in my life. I've got the relationship, the job, everything's fine. Why am I unsettled? What is death? What's the purpose of life? Why am I here? What does it all mean? When these questions become big and deep enough, they can kind of almost overwhelm you. And so these are 2 examples of how people will suddenly have a spiritual awakening. And then, when that happens, it just begins. Because then, suddenly, their worldview and what they believe don't fit anymore. Their friends and family are coming from a different place. They say this about near-death experiencers. They come back from that 3 minutes and they want to get a divorce because suddenly they're in a whole different space. Their values change. So when people have spiritual awakenings today, and I believe more and more people are, because what I see is consciousness is speeding up, and as they're speeding up, more and more people are having these spontaneous awakenings, and they feel lost. With all the resources, the support systems, it doesn't help. So then they feel alienated, they feel alone, they question what's true, what's not. There needs to be support and understanding that this is a really significant place in the human journey. If they are able to stay with it, if they trust it, hopefully if there's support, they will naturally and organically move into what we call illumination. The mystical experience will get stronger. The issues of light and dark will get bigger. It'll be coming up. Their personality will be in the process of being transformed. You know, it's not an easy time, and it can last a long time, and I'm sure many of you people have gone through this on your own. And as the mystics tell us, if they stay there, if they trust, if they surrender, if hopefully there's some support around, ultimately this will take somebody to union. And in union, it's how we began this day. The person that's able to feel God within, to know that God is beyond, and to see God in everybody's eyes, and to feel that you have a safe place to be and that you're not alone. And so I tried in this book to give a little bit of a guide and a map for people who might not know what's going on. So thank you.